Hey folks, greetings on this wonderful Saturday evening. It's absolutely beautiful, isn't it? I don't know if you can see the sky where I am, but it's really blue. I unfortunately didn't get a chance to do a live yesterday, and I was hoping to, because I did an amazing podcast interview with a gentleman that I've known for almost 15 years. And Harminder and I, if you've been following us on the Growth Tribes podcast, you'll know that we've started to bring in special guests on specific subjects. It's 8 o'clock, I know it's late, it's Saturday night. Most of you are probably chilling out. I've just had a pretty intense day. I've been doing a lot of clearing out. I'll just show you actually. So we're kind of back into the house at the moment. And the kids, there's a lovely area in here, part of the garden here, where I've been making an area for them to play. So if you can see, I've been making up wooden ladders and cutting all this part of the tree down here. And I don't know if you can see there, but it's going to turn into sort of a little den for them, hopefully over the summer. It's a bit of a project that's been put off. The only thing is I think a bee's nest actually going on down there. That has taken me a good part of the day today to clear this. This is absolutely overgrown. This part of the tree was in the wrong direction, so I've had to pull it back. And it is actually vertical now. These are beautiful trees, by the way. So hopefully we'll get some sunlight in there and it'll get growing. Anyway, that's not the point of the podcast, of the live this evening. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to share a little bit about the interview that we did yesterday. So with the podcast at the moment, we're starting to bring in people that we feel can add massive value and have been in their field for not just a couple of years, but a good period of time. And I'm looking to try and get a spread of different messages through the podcast, from health, vitality, finances. You might have seen the interview just recently on COVID-19 and the spread of the disease. So that was, if you haven't seen that, go watch that. This week, we did a podcast on estate planning and wills. Nice to see you, Mike. Hi, Attacker. And it was a real eye-opener. It was supposed to be around about an hour to an hour and a quarter. Podcast turned out to be 2 hours. 2 hours of talking about estate planning and wills. And you might think, really? Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the last 2 or 3 weeks, my understanding is that the number of people going online to download wills and to update their wills has spiked. And of course, that is not unusual in view of what's happening at the moment. And when we framed the podcast, we explained that, look, we're not trying to be morbid, but we are trying to be pragmatic. And the reality is that most people haven't actually spent a lot of time doing their estate planning and looking at their life planning and then their wills. And what was really interesting from the conversation that we had, and bear in mind, I'm 54, Harminder's 30, 31, and the gentleman that we interviewed, and I'll let you come and listen to it so you get a chance to experience it. I'm getting bitten by gnats here. He's probably in his mid to late 40s from memory. And he's been in the game a long time. I've known him for nearly 15 years as well. Really straight up guy, very experienced, but really pragmatic in the way we laid this out. So we had questions that we wanted to ask him. And then during the course of the podcast, he opened up and mentioned certain things, and that led to conversation. So we went everything from married people to unmarried people to what happens if you've been married before and then you had a will, but then you remarry, and actually there's implications on that. The voiding of wills. So a couple of things that I discovered to do with wills that I didn't realize become voided under certain circumstances. Also, we looked and discussed the whole idea that most people have a will and they believe that's everything. So they write their will and that's it. Whereas he talked very much about the philosophy of estate planning through your life. So in other words, as you go through your life at different phases, maybe some of you, we covered everything from relationships to children to trusts to offshore, right through to property investors, because we know we have a lot of people that follow us who are property investors, to entrepreneurs. That's why it ended up being 2 hours. And with me, I'm very specific about the questions I ask. Harminder was the same. Harminder asked some cracking questions from a young person's perspective. When, how, why should we be doing it? And these are all really important questions. So if you're watching this right now amidst the whole COVID situation, everybody listening and watching wants to stay healthy and vibrant, protect ourselves, keep your immune system up, as you learned if you'd followed us on the podcast just recently, and avoid any of that potential risk to our lives and to our family. Reality is, and this is what came out of the podcast, is that we should plan for it anyway, and we should be planning now and not waiting for something like this to occur. What was also very, very clear for anyone watching this is that the idea of filling in an online will or downloading a will from the internet and paying some cheap price and just doing some kind of generic will is just not going to work. Particularly if you've got kids, particularly if you own more than one property, or one of the questions I asked to clarify for our listeners was, what is classified as your estate? And basically, your estate is everything that you own. It could be everything from your home through to your investment properties, to a car if it's unencumbered, to jewelry that you might have, to possessions, shares, stocks, investments, money in the bank, etc. It's anything and everything that you own. And that estate, if there is not some sort of planning in place, it will by default fall into a will. If there's no will in place, then actually that's a really interesting conversation. And I'll let you listen to the podcast to find out what he shared with us about that. And what's really interesting was the number of people that don't do estate planning through their life. They wait, particularly younger people. And one of the questions that was thrown at him was, when do we need to start this process? And he said, the minute you start actually owning any sort of asset whatsoever, for example, your first home. And this needs to be sorted out very quickly. And is it owned in your own name? Are you a couple? Are you common law, husband and wife? Because you're living together for a long time, or are you actually a married couple? And there's an impact there. If you get divorced and go into another relationship, whoa, you want to listen to that section. That was like, whoa, my gosh. So the impact on your previous will. I guess the main message I really want to get across here as we kind of wrap up. Lovely to hear the birds. Yeah, that's very true. Can you hear them? It's beautiful, isn't it? We're quite privileged because we've got so many trees around us, as you can see. Look, so that's why they're all chirping away. But here's my message. And by the way, what was really interesting that came out of the conversation, bearing in mind the number of people that he's helped over the years, up to multimillionaires down to just everyday people, is that in the Asian community, and this came out, obviously myself, background, half Asian, Harminder Asian, is in the Asian community, the older people, in other words, the parents, very rarely want to discuss with the children about the estate and about the will, to the point where he even mentioned about one of his clients actually said, I don't want to even mention or discuss with my kids or have them aware of this. And Harminder asked the question, how can we raise this subject with our parents? Because most, even in England, in the United Kingdom, people aren't so open about wills, and children aren't so good at discussing with the parents about what possessions they have, what's the estate. And the problem is, if there isn't any sort of anything written down at all in the journey of your life, i.e. in the estate planning, in such a way that it's not clear, when it gets to the death of a member of the family, that's when it gets very emotional. First of all, we're going into mourning because we've lost a member that we love of our family. But secondly, we're in a situation where that person, somebody else in the family might be disputing the will. So estate planning is really important. And what the way to think of it is this: if you've got a pressure cooker and you put heat on it and you keep the cap on it, that pressure builds up. At some point, boom, off it goes, and it's just like psh. That is a little bit like a death leading straight into a will without any estate planning happening. Whereas estate planning through your life, whether you're 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60 right now, if you started it now, that's like releasing the pressure on the pressure cooker all the way through the cook. So effectively, it's not getting to a point where it's going to explode, meaning that by the time you get to the will really is simply guiding the family to reflect back on what the estate planning's already initiated. Everything from entrusting your assets, your estate into a trust, whether it's a discretionary trust or whether it's not. These are all factors that came up on the conversation as well. So I mean, I don't know how many of you are watching this and kind of understand the message. Maybe you can give me some thumbs up on this. It's nice to see a few people giving that. But if you're listening to this right now, bear in mind we're in lockdown for at least another month and a half to 2 months. That podcast will come out and not next week, because we've got 2 property ones coming out at the moment, but the week after. Please make sure you listen to it. And I do highly recommend that you get your parents to listen to it. I need to go back and have a look at a few things on a personal level, because I've realised there's some gaps in what we have got set up. I certainly need to talk to my mum. I've got to check in with my brothers as well about their situation. I mean, my middle brother, Marcus, had a heart attack last year. He's 51 years of age. My mum had a heart attack as well. We lost a member of our family in the space of 3 weeks last year. We had 2 heart attacks and grandparent passed away. So, you know, these things happen, and as much as we want to will our families to live forever and stay healthy, the unexpected can happen, and we need to prepare for that. So it's not particularly upbeat message for the end of a Saturday, but give me a thumbs up if this is at least having some sort of impact on you. I guess what I'm really wanting to say is love your family, protect your family now, and think about protecting them for the future as well, in such a way that, you know, there's not the emotional pressure on people in the event that something happens to you. And the same thing goes for your parents as well. And that'd be worth sharing this with your parents. And let me say to your parents, your children love you. Equally, I know you love your children. But if you haven't made that plan in place now, get it in place. Because some of the stories he shared on the podcast were quite disturbing and quite upsetting, just based on people not doing it, not putting the preparation in place. So I'm going to sign out. I've got to finish clearing up all of my tools, as you can see there, and go in and spend the last hour or so with the kids. All right, take care, everybody. Have a lovely Saturday night, and I'll see if I can pop a message out tomorrow on Sunday. It's nice to see some of you there. Hi, Harps, good to see you. And Mike and a few of you that put messages in. Very kind of you. Take care, bye.